Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you the top 5 best Arc boss creatures. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So coming in at the number 10 spot, I've decided to put the Mantis, as I find this creature is highly effective in boss scenarios. It is quite a fast, rapid creature, and also with that it can wield weapons too. It is a really valuable one for defeating the Manticore on Scorched Earth. That's definitely where I would advise it the most out of all of these. And although the tame method can be a little bit obnoxious in cases, I find it is not too bad, and there are some creatures on this list which do have much harder tame methods than this creature. Again, you're going to want to choose those weapons wisely that you use. Swords and pikes are going to be your best bet. I would arguably go for pikes because the durability is higher. Maybe the damage isn't higher, but you can always get some ascendant ones on there. Do take into mind that the durability of the weapons does drop a lot faster when the Mantis is wielding them compared to if you were wielding them, so don't judge it based on that. Either way, that's all the precautions for this creature to use it in a given boss scenario. Apart from also actually their health isn't the greatest, especially if you get some lower level ones, so be careful for that. But as long as the boss fight isn't too long, you will have a good time using Mantises in that scenario. Next up, I've chosen the Carcharodontosaurus for this list, as it does pay quite a good contribution to defeating any of the extinction bosses, that being any of the Titans and just the Alpha King Titan as well, the Beta King Titan, the Gamma King Titan. All of the bosses on extinction are going to be where you're going to use this creature, and it is your best bet really. Yes, you could still use Gigas, and Gigas will still be effective, but they are a lot less reliable than this creature, and let me tell you the main reason why. You probably know by now that the Giga has a blood rage, not a blood rage, sorry, a rage ability. The blood rage belongs to this creature, and essentially what that means is if it takes a certain amount of damage in a certain period of time, because it is based on the time as well, then it will take you off of its saddle and just go into full rage mode and just try and demolish everything around it. And if you're using it in a given boss scenario, it's going to be dealing quite a lot of damage quite quickly, especially considering, you know, they are the Titans we're talking about. They tend to damage quite quickly, and obviously with a lot of heavy damage. They don't tend to just give small amounts of damage out over time. It tends to be quite rapid and very forceful, and sometimes the Gigas can get out of control, and it's really not going to be your best bet. Also, the more you fight with these things, the more damage they'll do until their blood rage is full. They really are just more reliable than the Giga for that reason, and that's why they're here. Now, the Megalosaurus is one of those where I find it is quite underrated, and you might actually consider the Rock Drake to be quite a good boss tame for its cheesing of the Rock boss fight, so brief honourable mention there, but it is not on any other spot in the list. Anyway, talking about the Megalosaurus, a bit off topic to be honest. The Megalosaurus is one of those creatures where I find it is forgotten in the given boss fighting community, and I find it is a very useful one, and maybe it would be a bit of a pain to take it to that given boss arena, because it only really works well at night time. And I'm not sure if that works on the island or in other maps like that where you're in a boss fight. Does it have a day and night? Are these things going to sleep through it? Either way, on Operation they are absolute kings of the boss fighting area, and obviously they excel in that for many reasons. They have the bleed ability, obviously. On top of that too, they are very fast, nimble, agile creatures, and this hugely attributes them to being great boss creatures. Yes, a heavy damage dealing creature is nice to have, but one which is also very mobile will give you a much higher chance of given survival in these boss fighting scenarios, and this really does. On top of that, on Operation you can use it for so many other things as well, and on other maps too. They are great versatile travelers, and they generally just pack a punch all the time you're using them. So if you tend to travel a lot in the night time, and if you feel like maybe you want to give these creatures a go for some boss fights, then sure, try it, and I think you won't be disappointed. In number 7 we have got the Megatherium, and this creature is here because if you've ever fought the Broodmother, you will know how great these creatures are if you've used them in that boss fight, and this is just for one main reason. If they kill an insect, which in this case are the minions, or they're actually Aranios that the Broodmother spawns, but they're the minions of which the Broodmother spawns, it's going to kill those, and then it's going to get this insect buff, which essentially I think it's called like a rage buff again, something to do with that, and it's going to deal a lot more damage to the Broodmother and to all the other creatures around it as well. On top of that, is actually these things are going to take less damage too, which is even greater in a given boss scenario. And if you have a ute on top of it as well, I actually haven't included this in the list because this is just the fighters for boss battles, although I really should give it an honorable mention, as the ute is one of those creatures where it gets a gold star for being a great boss creature. But this is the top 10 boss fighters list. I probably didn't make that too obvious apart from in the title, where I think in the intro I actually just said boss Tames, but you know, you can read, I'm relying on you for that. Either way, yeah, very good for the Broodmother boss fight, and the Ute deserves a little honorable mention because it still can fight, and you know, you'll want one in a boss fight. Continuing on, we have got the Theory, and the reason why this creature is here is not just because its saddle is unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
It is because this is really a great boss creature for dealing with the dragon on the island, and obviously ASA is still kind of a new thing and a lot more people are playing on the island. Admittedly, Scorched Earth has moved a lot of players onto that, as honestly that is the best thing in my opinion ASA has to offer right now. But the Theory is that go-to for the dragon boss fight, and that is because it has an ability, the dragon, not the Theory, where the dragon is going to shoot out loads of fire and it's going to deal tons of damage to carnivores. It actually is particularly offensive to those creatures, whereas the Theory does not fall into that category as it is not a carnivore, and it still packs a lot of punch in the damage department, has great health, great stamina, great mobility, and its weight isn't too bad as well. That doesn't really matter an awful lot in a boss fight as long as it still is enough to maybe carry a bit of food in it, and just, you know, so you can ride it possibly. Also, that actually does come to one thing. For food, you can't just chuck meat in this thing's inventory, although it can gather it, it does not eat it. And sweet vegetable cake is your best bet to healing these things quickly, but that is quite expensive, so that's the only real downside for using Theories in a boss fighting scenario. In number 5, we have got the Spinosaurus, and come on, when it comes to boss fights, this is another one of those underrated creatures, and I really do wish still that people use these creatures more for boss fights, because Rexes do seem to be all the rage. And although they are on this list later on, because I really do feel as if, you know, they deserve a place on the list as they have done a lot for people in boss fights, this could possibly be seen as a potentially better one. It's just considering the use of a Rex and the versatility that it offers, I'm having to put that creature high on the list. It's just simply that has a point of higher status. But the Spino has a lot going for it as well. Admittedly, having a lower health stat though, it does boast even more damage than the Rex and a hell of a lot more mobility. On top of that, it is actually a pretty good underwater swimmer as well. Not obviously the best out there, but you could do the Moda with some Spinos if you wanted, and obviously if you're doing that on Gen 1 you'd be getting X Spinos anyway, so there is a boosted variant. They can also, when on land, get on their hind legs and deal even more damage. They can turn 360 on the spot, which a Rex can't do, which makes them invaluable for PvP potential. But you know, still, a boss fight's not PvP, but it can still be applied to any given combat scenario. It's just that is mainly used in PvP, and it's where the Rexes lack in PvP. It's why they don't actually get used all too much, because their ability is frankly quite rubbish, and if the thing that they're attacking isn't exactly in front of them, then there's a tendency that they'll miss, and they tend to be quite easy to kill off that way. But yes, the Spinos are at number 5. let's continue on. This might be an unpopular opinion considering I'm going to give it away that the Rex is in at number 3, but in at number 4 I'm putting the Aloe because I find it is a really great boss creature. Not only is it small and very agile, it also does boast the pack buff on top of it and the bleed ability too. They really are great little fighters and they're not the hardest to tame. You can even tame it 3 in one go if you build a big enough trap. Simply lure all of them in and then boom, there you go. Once you've knocked them out and you've fed them, you've got 3 aloes and a good 5 or so, maybe 10 if you are doing some of the alpha boss fights, will be enough for all of them on the island I'm talking about here, because I'm mainly generalizing to that map, because they really are very effective fighters. You could probably still do it with 5 as long as their health is high enough. That's the only thing they're really lacking compared to something like a Rex, because they'll probably be dealing more damage and they are far more agile and just generally more convenient, especially actually if you're doing the oversteer. I find, although I don't really typically use them for that boss fight as it is a little bit too long, and I find quite a lot of the aloes do tend to die, especially considering even the Rexes tend to die and their health is quite a bit higher than something on the aloe. But I guess maybe if you brought enough you could do it. I haven't really done it all too much. I've done it once or twice, but that was on Gamma. I've never done the alpha overseer with aloes. I've only ever done it with Rexes and then obviously a UT, because you've got to bring the UT in. It's not on this list because I don't really use it all too much as a general boss fighter, but I did give it a mention as it definitely still can fight. I guess I've given it 2 mentions now. But yes, the Aloe really does deserve to be on this list. If you've never used one before for a boss fight scenario, take yourself a pack of maybe 5 and do one of the Gamma ones or a beta. Actually, they could probably even smash through that with absolute ease. Maybe don't try the alphas until you've got at least 10 of these things, and you're going to have a really great time. You're not going to regret taming one at all. At number 3, like I said, we have got the Rex, and I have to put this thing here. Come on, it boasts a lot of health. It has a lot of damage up its sleeve, and although it's not the most mobile, it really is the foundation of what is a great boss creature, and people use these things all over the place. They really are a go-to. If you never can figure out what creature you're going to use for a boss fight, the Rex is probably the answer that you've been looking for. It really does make sense. It is a big carnivore that is going to just generally pack a lot of punch in the damage department and be quite defensive in the aspect of its health is quite good, and that is where it stands apart from a lot of the other carnivores, because its health is a lot higher, which makes it ideal for boss scenarios. Yes, you're going to want to deal loads of damage quickly, but you're also going to want to have enough health to withstand it, and again, that's where creatures like sometimes the Spino and the Aloe tend to fall a little bit behind, and some of the other creatures that I talked about much earlier on the list, which is why they're further back. The Rex is just the foundation of it all, and it deserves to be here. It is the OG. It deserves a respect that, you know, it actually doesn't tend to get quite as much nowadays, just considering how easy they are to tame. People have them all over the place, but they really can do a lot, especially if you get some mutated ones on top of it as well, some health and damage mutations. Don't underestimate these things in a given boss fighting scenario, because they will pack a punch and they're very much worth it. In number 2, we have got the Shadow Mane, and come on, when looking at this creature, you can probably tell why it is such a great boss tame. Yes, maybe it doesn't have quite the level of health as a Rex, but considering its insanely high mobility, its pack buff, its hydration buff, and the fact that it can just deal tons of damage, and you can get loads of these things relatively easily, especially once you've got your first pair, because the tame method is actually quite awkward. So maybe it's not the easiest from the get-go, but once you've got a good high-level male and female, breed those things up and you're going to have yourself an absolute army of Shadow Manes, especially if you get some mutations on top of it as well. They are the second best boss creatures that I can think of for any given boss fight, apart from obviously the extinction bosses. Just use Gigas or Carchondosauruses for that, because they're in a sort of different league. You can even use these things for the Moda if you want, as they are very nice at swimming underwater and actually just underwater boss fights, of which there are only one of. I've done all of the variants of the Moda, Gamma, Beta and Alpha with this thing, and it did actually work pretty well. If you haven't done that before, again, give that a try. In at number 1, we have got the Deinonychus, and this always tops my list for the best box creatures. Some people just say, well, they're really feeble in the health department, you can just kill them off really quickly. Obviously, don't use these things for the extinction bosses, they will not last, but for everything else, also apart from the Moda actually as well, they are the ideal because they deal bleed damage to bosses as they can grapple onto them and just tear them to absolute shreds. I find they are just so effective, so mobile, so useful. They also have the pack buff as well, like the Shadowbane, and yes, maybe it's only really as effective for one less boss than the Shadowman, so you'd be like, well, the Shadowman has to be better, but I find it is more effective for all those other bosses than the Shadowman, which is why I have to put it in at number 1. It is the king of boss fights for me. Yes, some people think differently. Some people like Aloes must be in the number 1 spot. Some people like Rexes must be in the number 1 spot. Some people would say Shadowman should be in the number 1 spot, or Gigas or Carcharodontsauruses for the extinction boss fights, and they're just their sheer power. But the Shadowman, the Deinonychus, always deserves to be in the number 1 spot for me, and I'm pretty sure my opinion will never change unless like the Deinonychus 2.0 comes out and it absolutely changes my perception of what the Deinonychus is, and I'm like, well, this new creature is just miles and miles better. But I still have not found that. Ever since Valguera was released, I've been using these things for my boss fights and pretty much nothing else. End of. The top 10 best Arc PvE tames. In at number 10, we have got the Stegosaurus, and come on, this is one of those creatures where it's like, oh my god, this is such a great one for PvE, and it is actually pretty good for PvP as well, with obviously all of its turret soaking abilities. But well, we talked about that today. It's a PvE list, not a PvP one, of course. With this thing, they're just a really well balanced berry gatherer, and yes, you could say Trikes are really great as well, and Parasols are really great, but I've never really liked them as much as the Stego. And actually, this is the only berry gatherer that I've really decided to put on this list. There's one more, but it does a lot of other things apart from berry gathering. But you know, this is the only main berry gatherer I've actually put on the list today, because it's not the biggest part of a PvE player's life, just gathering loads of berries up, but it really does help out a lot to have a creature that does berry gather, and the Stego is definitely one of those. The Theory I will also give a brief honourable mention here as well, as I think it deserves to be on the same spot as the Stego. The two gatherers you're going to want for like plant-based things are the Theory and the Stego. Yes, you can use the moss chops for organic poly and all of that, but the Theory is great at gathering fibre, like the moss chops as well, so you could give that a brief honourable mention, but I personally don't really like it as much as the Theory, and the Theory is very useful for the dragon boss fight on top of that too. So the Stego and the Theory are going to be the two creatures that are in at the number 10 spot today. Next up, we have got the Yuti, and I just really like this as a general creature for my PvE playing, not just obviously for the use in boss fights, which, you know, it is commonly what it is used for, and that's pretty much what everyone does use it for its courage roar in boss fights. And you'll bring a Daedon along as well, although that's not going to be on the list because I don't really think they are as important as the Yuti. The Yuti has a lot of advantage over it in my opinion, because it just generally does a lot more, and if your creatures are strong enough, you shouldn't need to heal them up anyway along the way. But I find this creature again is just a really good all-round general carnivore. You may also be surprised that you're not going to be finding the Rex on the list. I just find that there are better boss creatures out there than the Rex, and it's sort of been overtaken away. Even something like a Yuti, you could bring loads of Yutis into a boss fight, and a lot of you have been saying you find them a lot harder to tame than the Rex, and I would say that to some extent, especially considering the biome, but I've never really struggled with taming the Yutis at all, and I can get a nice high level breeding pair with relative ease, and then just breed tons of Yutis, and the Yuti army is there, because I would rather have an army of Yutis than an army of Rexes. The Crystal Wyvern I found is often just not talked about in a PvE just aspect or conversation in general, and the reason for that is probably because the map is slightly more obscure. Not everyone is out there on Crystal Isles, especially considering it's not in ASA. but these creatures really are, in my opinion, better than the normal generic wyverns, and people seem to talk about those all the time. I just prefer their elemental abilities, and they are far easier to tame. No questions asked. If someone says down in the comments below that these are harder to tame than a normal wyvern, you're wrong. I'm sorry. These are just so much easier. You only need to be level 60, and Note Run is ridiculously easy. You'll have no troubles doing that whatsoever. Then simply trap and knock out Crystal Wyvern to get that Primal Crystal, and then it's passive tame. Basic as just like that. And if you want to be really sure that you don't fall off, you can always have a grappling hook on you and just grapple onto it as well. But if you actually get into the right spot on its back, then you should be fine and you won't need one anyway. They just really are, in my opinion, a lot easier to tame than the wyvern, and you get all of those wyvern features, if not even better, considering the elemental abilities are better. My personal favourite is Blood Crystal Wyvern. Comment down below what your favourite Crystal Wyvern is. I've heard the Ember Crystal Wyvern is quite a favourite among many in the PvE community. In number 7, we have got the Shadow Mane, and come on, this is just such a ability jam-packed creature from Gen 2. It deserves to be on the list, although not as high as some of the other creatures, as they've been around for a lot longer, and they also do spawn on some more accessible maps, are much easier to tame, and you know, there are other rationales and reasons for them being higher on the list. But the Shadow Mane really does need to be on here. As well as a PvP player's dream, it is also a PvE player's dream. They are fast, quick, agile, and they can traverse huge distances over very short periods of time. Just look at how high this thing can jump. They also have the hydration buff, same as the Crystal Wyvern actually, although that's pretty useless why it has one. And they can utilize the pack buff on top of that as well, and go invisible too when both a male and female are present, and they're really great swimmers on top of that as well. You've just got so much versatility with a creature like this. It really is worth just getting one and using one. The only downside, of course, is the absolutely painful taming method, but I'm sure the benefits really do outweigh the negatives of said method. Now, I'm sure we all know the Desmodus, and it really is one of those creatures where, come on, you're going to be using it in a given PvE scenario as long as you've gone on field at some point and actually managed to tame one. They obviously use the same tame method as the Bloodstalker. Those blood bags are what you're going to need, and if you get a low level one first, which is definitely what I'd recommend with this, you're barely going to need any, really. Like if you're going for, like, I'm talking ridiculously low level, and then just farm loads of blood bags and get the high level which you've just been hoping for, and then maybe stash that lower level one in your base in case maybe you die out on an adventure and you need to get back on something. It's always nice to have some spare flyers. Obviously they have the glide ability, but their main use is Sanguine Elixir. 30% of your tames are done with a simple click of a button, and obviously their blood bag farms. They also can go invisible in the nighttime on top of this too, but I chose the wrong biome for this where there's no nighttime cycle, so I couldn't show that for the sake of today's video. Generally also they are great flyers with a lot of mobility on them, and they will get you everywhere that you're going to need to go. In at number 5, we've got the Argentavis, and this has really carried me through a lot of my Arc playing. The RG has always been there for me ever since right in the olden days when I started actually using these things, and I'm not sure with the chronology of abilities and when things were added, but nowadays they have a smithy as a saddle. They have a nice regen buff. They can carry 2 creatures at once because they can carry one in their beak and one in their claws, and they can carry a very wide variety of creatures on top of that too. Their weight reduction on metal, crystal and obsidian is just so well received. I really can't use it enough. Like all of those metal runs I've done with the RG compared to something like a Pteranodon, it is just so much nicer to use. And obviously they do not have any kind of speed advantage compared to something like the Pteranodon, but I tend to actually turn on flyer speed leveling, but still, even at the base speed, they are very usable. But you know, I'm very much an advocate for flyer speed leveling, so I'll keep that there. But as always, the PvP players just taking it to the limits. I'm not just going to blame it all on you though, because PvE players did go a little bit mental, and it did make things a little bit more mental. But you know, at the end of the day, Arc's quite a mental game, so why don't we keep it a little bit mental? I guess, you know, cheaters and things like that. It's actually kind of sad, you know, all of the Arc cheating problems, but it sort of does happen with every game. A bit more extreme with this one though, considering the bugs are absolutely everywhere. But anyway, let's continue. Some people might get a little bit angry about my choice of Bloodstalker at number 4. I simply love this thing for underwater travel, and traveling is a big part of my PvE playing. So from my preference of PvE playing, this is a very, very useful creature for me, and I sort of need one nowadays. Like, I'm just like, if I'm gonna go anywhere in the water or do any of those underwater caves, even if I'm on the island, I'm hopping straight over to Gen 1, getting a Bloodstalker and coming back with one before even stepping foot in the oceans to do those caves, or just generally traversing the oceans to go to underwater caves and things. I know Megalodons exist and I could do it with a Basilow quite easily, but sorry, I just love the Bloodstalker for underwater travel too much. It is so fast, it is so agile, you can see all the aggros of the creatures. It can also skate along the top of the water too, and that is just something which you really do miss if you're on some other creatures that are obviously underwater based ones, and I can't not have it at this point. You could say I've been a little bit spoilt with a creature like the Bloodstalker, because there are again a lot of other great ocean creatures out there, but I just simply don't use them anymore, and this is the only one that I use. It also actually deals a reasonable amount of damage, especially if you level it up too, and on top of that, the downsides to any underwater creatures are when you're out of the water, you can't use them anymore, whereas the Bloodstalker, you can keep using it as the water as well, and it is just a really fast, agile travel mount on top of that everything too, so you really can't undermine it for everything that's got going for it, because it really does have a heck of a lot going for it, and it's the same tame method as the Desmodus. If you get yourself a Desmodus too, then you can be pumping out Bloodstalker taming, and I just love taming and using these things as underwater mounts. In number 3, we've got the Baryonyx, and at the end of the day, this really is just the best PvE caving creature. You could argue the Shadowmane or something like that, but it is just so well known, and you know, it's on the island, so everyone really can just start using this thing straight away, and once you've got one, you're never really going to want to turn back. They are small, fast, agile carnivores, which can also jump as well. You know, if you want that Mario style dinosaur, they can actually have a spin attack on top of that in the water. So I guess Mario Galaxy, but the Baryonyx. I don't know why I'm referencing this, but let's continue on, I guess. They also have quite a hefty amount of damage for a carnivore this size, which obviously you would expect is going to make it a great caving creature. If you're thinking of doing the artifact of the Skylords, don't bother taking one of these things. That cave is too small for pretty much every creature you'll find in the game. Possibly you could get a Saber in there if you really tried, but you'd have to use cryos in a lot of sections. It's simply not worth it. Do that cave on foot. You can see that spin attack there, the Super Mario Galaxy energy, and you can see it stuns creatures up to the size of a Megalodon. Don't try anything bigger than a Megalodon, because it simply will not work. But you'll probably have the damage to take them out anyway. Either way, they're just really nice, small, agile, nimble, great, small carnivores. Don't know why I said small twice. They're really great for caving, and they're great for PvE. Then, at number 2, we have got the Maywing, and this creature is here because it is the epitome of travel. Yes, the Bloodstalker is my all-time favourite underwater mount, but this is just my all-time favourite travel mount, and it's actually not too bad of a swimmer as well. It can glide along the top of the water as well. And I do maybe occasionally use this for short little dips, maybe out of my base if I'm building in the underwater caves on the island, or something similar to that, or if I'm just briefly going through something and I can't be bothered to switch over my creature, because they are obviously the epitome, like I said, of flying creatures. They're not technically flyers, they're gliders, but still the speed and agility you can get with a creature like this over such long distances, no matter the gradient or elevation, is insane. And that's sort of where the rock drake falls behind a little bit, in my opinion. They don't work quite as well for just general or travel, and also they do spawn aberration, and they are, you know, a little bit harder to tame than the Maywing, considering this thing saddles unlocks at level 18. You can simply trank it out with a few tranks, and obviously just use some signs to trap it. It is such a cheap tame, and so useful. They can also gather berries as well. This is the other berry gatherer, quote unquote, that is on the list. And obviously they're portable feeding trough too. You really do need these things for PvE if you're playing Ark Survival Evolved. If you're playing Ascended, tough luck. And in at number 1 is the Deinonychus. This always will top my lists for the best PvE Ark creatures, unless something comes out which is just so insanely small, nimble, yet insanely powerful that it manages to top this creature. But so far, still nothing has, and I'm confident, nothing really will. They take no fall damage and have a lot of agility. On top of that, they can deal bleed damage to bosses, and as far as I'm concerned, they're the only creature that can do that, as they can grapple onto them and just absolutely tear into shreds. They have the pack buff on top of those too, and although yes, they're not great in the water, that's not what I'm using these things for. I'm using these things for general travel and boss fights. And if you actually were wondering about the lack of boss fighting creatures on this list, it's because basically all of those fights can be done with the Deinonychus. I wouldn't really do the extinction boss fights with something like the Deinonychus, but that is such a minority in terms of the scale of all the Ark maps. I decided not to include any creatures that might be good for said boss fights, because for everything else really I can't think of any other exceptions apart from the Moda. Actually, maybe the Master Controller, you'll want something with a little bit more health, but still with some health mutations you can get through it on alpha with absolute ease. Then they're the only scenarios where you probably wouldn't be using one of these creatures. But everything else, they are just the perfect, the ideal, and nothing really does top them. On top of that, in the general world, they can scale up any kind of wall or vertical surface with absolute ease. You'll have no trouble traveling around the map with these things, and obviously they're so small and nimble and agile, they're not really going to get stuck on a lot of things too, which is generally nice. They are just the best PvE Ark creature. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you all did enjoy, as I definitely did enjoy making this one. As always, comment down below your favourite Ark PvE tame, and if you didn't agree with this, then you'll put your 10 in the comments below. Don't know what that was, and I'll see you all later.